the meeting, and welcome to those people at the back that have come to listen, and welcome also to Dave Congreve, who's standing in for Alison Ward, who's away on other business. So the attendance, the register has gone round. Apologies, obviously there's none. Declarations of interest. Linda, do you want to?
Personal interest, which allows the Deputy Leader to stay there. But his wife is also the Governor of Pont-y-Wynydd, and that creates a different interest, which would normally be prejudicial. But here, Councillor Jones has applied and obtained a dispensation from the Ethics and Standards Committee, which allows him to speak so he can give the views of the community, but recognises it would not be appropriate for him to take a vote in this. So Councillor Jones understands that. That's fine. And then on item 5, the school transport, again the Ethics and Standards Committee has been involved. And in relation to the Cabinet members here, I know Councillor Morby has a child in receipt of a travel grant. And although other members have a dispensation, Councillor Morby has already indicated that because of his particular position as the executive member, he feels it would not be appropriate to take part in that. So he has declared a prejudicial interest, and he will leave for that item. He'll neither take part in the debate nor vote. Is that correct, Councillor Morby? And I think those are all the interests. Thank you, Leader.
All right, thank you very much, Linda. On then to item 4. This is Dermot. And John. Joint Act.
Thank you, Leader.
This is the reorganisation proposals arising from the 21st Century School Programme.
It is. So the purpose of this report is to consider the outcomes of the consultation exercise and the proposals to close Pont-y-Wynydd Primary School on the 31st of August 2015 and to determine the next steps. In September and October 2013, Cabinet received reports in respect to the proposed closure of Pont-y-Wynydd. The October report recommended a delayed target date for closure for September 15 rather than 2014. I just want to remind Cabinet of that. The background to this paper is that obviously Torvine's primary estate has some schools that are trying to operate in buildings and grounds that are not fit for purpose and have an unaffordable maintenance backlog. They're too small to be run economically in today's financial climate and have significant surplus capacity in their local cluster of schools and aren't located where the demand for school places is concentrated. So I'm going to just move straight on to point 5 in the report, which again, because of some changes, I just want to read out just so there's absolute clarity. The initial consultation period ran from the 4th of November to May 16th December 2013, but following the consultation events, and those are detailed in the report for you, held at Pont-y-Wynydd Primary School during the period, it was agreed to provide additional information and issue an updated consultation document and provide stakeholders with a further 42 days to comment. The updated document was issued on the 17th of March, with a closing date for comments on the 28th of April. So this report details all of those consultation responses. Key issues coming out are highlighted in section 6 of the report, and we'll pick up some of these in order, and may ask Cabinet just to, if you want to pause and go through each one of the key issues. Obviously, members have already had a copy of all the responses we've received during the consultation period in their library as well. So, if I draw your attention to 6.5 in the report, so I'll just try and get on screen. some of the key issues arising, we try to summarise here. The first of which was the capacity of Pennygarn Primary School to accommodate all the pupils with new housing also being developed in the area was seen as a barrier. We're confident that the capacity of Pennygarn Primary School is sufficient to accommodate all the pupils who may go there. We are in discussion and have been in discussion with the governing body and the head teacher of the school for some time. Those discussions are ongoing, and we're looking at reconfiguration of the buildings as discussions continue. We were with school last week continuing those discussions. So we're comfortable and confident that we can make those adaptations in sufficient time and to a high standard to accommodate those pupils. Leader, if I pause there and just ask if there are any comments on each one, perhaps as we go through.
When you talk about the development at Pennygarn, that's already well advanced. There will be people moving into those houses now within the next month, I should imagine. Now, every one of those houses are actually houses. There's no flats, no single-person accommodation. They're all family accommodation, 2, 3, and even 4-bedroom houses. Now, common sense would dictate that there's going to be a large number of children coming from that development. Additional to that, there's other developments to take place. I and other ward councillors have had planning applications from Bronhaven about houses being built in St Cadoc's, flats being built in Trevethin. The planning application for the Pontypool Hospital site is still alive. That is without taking into account the 130 pupils coming from Pontywenid. So I seriously doubt if there is sufficient accommodation at Pennygarn to take half of these numbers.
Should we just come back on that just to answer those particular points? Or
Yes, go on if you want.
Just to confirm, Cabinet, really, that we've used the same approach that we use with all such proposals here. We take account of known developments coming through in consultation with colleagues in planning, and in this case we've done exactly that, and they're reflected in the projected numbers going forward. The numbers going forward, because of shifts in the population generally across Torvine, not just in this specific area, is on a downward trend, and that's why we're confident that we'll be able to accommodate all of the learners that will need to be taught at Pennygarn in the future.
Right, thanks for that. Dermot, go on.
thank you, Leader. Staff issues and whether they will be made with...
Anthony.
So just to be clear, what you're saying there is you're confident that there is the capacity, but if any sort of issues need to be dealt with in terms of reconfiguration in order to address that issue, then you'll take every step necessary.
In terms of the projections that we included in the consultation document, we know that the numbers are reducing. We know that the current buildings at Pennygarn can cope with the numbers that we project with some internal remodelling. So yes, we can deal with the projected numbers going forward. In the event that those numbers were to increase in the future, then that would be a different situation. But we're not projecting any increases above what we can cope with at the moment.
Right, anyone else? Right, carry on, Dermot.
Staff issues and whether they will be made redundant. Clearly, in any process where a school closes or amalgamates, then staff quite rightly are concerned about what will happen to them. What we can't do is give an absolute commitment that all staff will be guaranteed a post, but what we can say is that we work very closely with trade unions and with our other partner head teachers to make sure that we reduce the impact on staff, and we have a very good record of avoiding compulsory redundancies, and we're comfortable and confident that we'll be able to bring a good solution in this case, but what we can't do is absolutely guarantee that no one will be made compulsorily redundant, but we're confident that we should be able to avoid that in most cases, if not all. The quality of teaching and learning, given the Essendon report in Pontyuith Primary School was received. So, in other words, will the quality of teaching in the new school, the pupils going into Pennygarn, be equally as good? Essendon have already responded to us and have said that they believe that there shouldn't be an issue, in effect, that the standard of education in Pennygarn is is comparable. So I'm not sure that's quite the word they used. It may have been, John. I'll just check on that.
The phraseology used by Eston is that we have to be able to demonstrate that the education that will be provided at the school where the majority of children are anticipated to go is at least equal to that of the school from which that we're planning to close, and that is the case in this instance.
Okay.
Right, thanks for that. If any member wants to make a view, then you need to indicate.
Thank you. Traffic congestion in and around Pennygarn Primary School and the surrounding area. We know this is an issue already, and there are significant issues in the whole area. What I need to say is that we're not anticipating any particular increase in the number of pupils here. We're talking about the same number of pupils going to schools which are relatively close apart. So we're not expecting that we're going to see any influx, and there are ongoing discussions with other partners about how we can look at managing that traffic on the sites. John, do you want to
Just two things there. One is that we've in conversation with Neighbourhood Services about traffic impact assessment, which is the same, you recall, when we were talking about the potential closure of Llantarnam and Fairwater. So traffic impact assessment on this site. And the other thing is Pennygarn currently doesn't have a travel plan. In terms of managing congestion around the school site itself, a travel plan is often a very effective tool. Again, colleagues in Neighbourhood Services work with schools on travel plans, and we're going to ask that they do so with Pennygarn.
Right, hang on, Lewis.
Yeah, could I take issue with that? Because I actually live there and come past there every day. Now, this morning, to get down here for 9 o'clock, I came out at 8:15. A distance of probably half a mile, and I had to come out 3/4 of an hour early to get here for 9 o'clock. Now, when you say that there isn't going to be any extra influx, there's bound to be extra influx because there are pupils' parents in Pontnewydd who are going to take their children by car or whatever to Pennygarn. When you have a look at the route that they're going to walk, and I walked this on Friday with some other members, you know, it's all right walking it in the middle of the day. You walk it in the morning up a state when you've got all the traffic coming from Gwynthlew, coming into Gwynthlew, going out from Gwynthlew, buses going everywhere else, besides the private transport and the service buses. It's probably the most congested school in the whole of Torfaen. If I think back to the last Cabinet meeting when this was discussed, I did ask all Cabinet members to visit both schools, have a bit of a site meeting to get some grasp of the situation. Unfortunately, that wasn't responded to. But there is a very, very real situation of traffic congestion and potential injury outside Pennygarn School and in the vicinity of Pennygarn School, particularly Church Avenue.
Anybody else? No, if not, carry on, Dermot.
Okay, and obviously that last point is, as John's already mentioned, the travel plan for Pennygarn School will seek to address that, and really that comes on to one of the next points around safe routes to school, when there is further work that is ongoing. So we know that's an area of concern, and there will be further work. Excuse me. The issue about whether the facilities at Pontnewydd Primary School, including the TV studio, can be replicated at Pennygarn. Clearly, what we wouldn't want to do is any of the equipment that's currently at Pontnewydd, should the decision go ahead to close, we would look to see how that could actually be used in other schools, and obviously in this case in Pennygarn. And we would look, as part of the discussion we're having with Pennygarn at the moment, about the restructuring within their own school. So we'll always look to maintain and increase the curriculum provision, and that would be part of that is part of what we're currently doing with the school.
Right. Anybody want to make a comment? If not, carry on.
Okay, in terms of whether there are sufficient catering facilities at Pennygarn, I think there are currently 3 sittings at lunchtime. So we're in discussion with the school about the plan, really, if you like, about how we can accommodate the increase in number of pupils at the school. We are confident in discussing with the school that we can accommodate all pupils within still 3 sittings. We're looking at everything from the actual capacity of the kitchens and how they can prepare food in time, looking at the seating arrangements, different types of equipment to make sure that we can manage the flow of pupils through the space they have available. and we are comfortable and confident that we can that there is sufficient capacity to cater for all the pupils on the school.
Let me bring Lewis in.
Well, I thank you for your optimism, but I just don't share that. I'm a governor at Pennygarn School, and there are acute problems at this moment in time. As I say, there are 3 sit-ins. Very often, the children who are in the 3rd sit-in don't have any hot food for which they are entitled to under the Act. They're used to having sandwiches. Now, that's at this present time. If we're going to put 100-odd extra children from Pontywenny, besides the ones that's coming in from the developments that are taking place, there's no way under the sun you can cope with that without making an extension to take it. Because this has been raised time and time again, and although officers saying they can, we've got no evidence how they will do it. There hasn't been a sketch, a diagram, on the back of a fag packet thing. Nothing at all has come forward to give any member, any parent, any pupil, any teacher, any confidence that this can be achieved.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, in terms of the discussions we're having with the head teacher at the moment and the leadership within the school, clearly that's a key area that we're looking. The confidence that I'm speaking with isn't simply from officers, it's from the discussions that we're having with the school staff at the moment. The way things have been done up to this point at Pennygarn, there's already recognition that we can do things differently. And there are other resources that we can bring to bear to try and make sure we maximise the capacity within the dining hall and its facilities. So the confidence that I'm speaking of doesn't come from simply sitting remote from the school, not knowing what's happening. It comes from discussions with the school who manage this on a day-to-day basis and knowing that we can affect change and that we can accommodate those numbers. Do you want anything else you want to add to that? No? Okay.
No.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm really not convinced by that. It's vital that children have a hot meal at a reasonable time. So you need to convince me a little bit more than what you've just said, because it's obvious with the increased pupil numbers, they've already got a problem there. How many sit-ins? 3 sit-ins, you said? So I can see this going to be increased, and that is a worry, because children leave home for school very early in the mornings, and if they are late then having their lunch, for whatever reason, that makes things even more difficult. And bearing in mind there are a lot of children that perhaps that's the only hot meal a day they would have.
Well, in a minute. But other people have had their hands up before you, and I'll bring you in straight away. David.
The previous 2 speakers, so that's fine.
Right, Brian.
A number of the queries really are based on the situation as it's perceived to be now. I don't think that I would agree that the situation with regard to children only having a meal in school is a reasonable one to put forward in these circumstances. That's not something which the local authority can take responsibility for. But the point is that we're talking now about a programme of development of schools within the borough, which has been approved since 2010, which relies on the principle that the only way you can invest in buildings, invest in improved catering facilities, invest in remodelling of Pennygarn School to allow extra pupils to be properly and safely accommodated, is by saving money elsewhere. The whole philosophy of this programme is that we need to eradicate surplus places, we need to get rid of old stock. Frankly, we need then to use the money which is released by those proposals in order to prudentially borrow millions of pounds in order to improve the stock generally. And that's the principles which you agreed as a cabinet in 2010. It's the principles you agreed as a council in 2011. Most of us were involved in those discussions and agreed with those particular principles. It's only when we come to actually implement those principles that we start getting these sorts of issues thrown up. We know there are issues which need to be addressed in Pennygarn before September 2015. We will have the ability to do the remodelling, to do the necessary extensions. if you agree with what you've already agreed in principle, and that is that we must close schools which are uneconomic, unsustainable, which don't offer inclusive facilities because of the limitations of the building, in order to invest in better facilities within other schools which are larger and which have the capacity to be successful in the terms that we agreed within the 21st Century Programme. So, you know, we know there are issues which need to be addressed in relation to catering. We know there's internal remodelling necessary in order to make sure that all the classes are suitable and available for the increase in pupils. But we can do that with the money which is released by virtue of being able to say that this particular school will cease to be a school in September 2015. And that was part of the rationale behind stopping the original proposal, which was to do this in 2014, and saying, we'll wait till 2015 in order to make sure that we were achieving those savings in order to do the necessary investment at Penigard.
Right, Anthony?
Okay, I accept the point that Brian made about the sort of the chicken and egg situation here, about the need to make tough decisions in order to invest in improvements, and I accept that going forwards. Maybe what the officers can take from the points that Gwynair and Lewis made, and which I concur with, about the importance of hot meals, especially at a time when many residents are having to rely on food banks and struggling to pay for food. You know, that we really do sort of value that as important going forwards.
Thanks for that. Carry on.
Just to respond to that very quickly, clearly that's something that the local authorities, that the officers and the local authority are also committed to. In terms of the discussions that we're having with the school, that's an absolute priority for us. We want to make sure that all children have a nurturing environment, and having a hot meal is obviously part of that, and we accept that.
David?
One quick one on the back of that, because I would echo. The very general point that Brian is making is absolutely understood. And it is, but it is, the detail of putting these pieces together, because we shouldn't ignore the fact, and we certainly shouldn't minimise the impact of some of the decisions that will have to be taken in terms of the detail of these. And it seems to me that other members have hit the nail on the head when they talk about provision of hot meals and so on and so forth. The one thing that we haven't commented on is the time span over which 3 sit-ins, or however this manifests itself going forward, the time span, because if it is currently the case that there are 3 sit-ins, then that obviously drags out the whole time span of lunchtime, which has got to be a bit of an inconvenience, to say the very least, in terms of the learning programme for the day. So presumably, in looking at ways and means of accommodating the influx in terms of provision of hot meals and the addressing of the problem of 3 sit-ins, there will be an urgent addressing of this notion of the time span in order not to disrupt any further than is absolutely necessary the whole teaching process, which is what the kids fundamentally go to school for anyway.
Very quickly on that, yeah, I mean, this isn't about simply looking at lunchtime and feeding children. It's about, as you say, it's the timetabling and the logistics of the whole school day, with a focus on making sure that children feel safe, supported, they get a meal, but they're also, the focus is on their educational outcomes as well, and other outcomes. So the discussions we're having with school aren't just about the timetabling in the canteen. You're right, it's about the logistics of the whole day, and how we do not do anything to undermine the outcomes that the school are getting for children.
Right, thanks for that. Carry on.
So, lost my point. Safe walking routes we've touched on slightly, and that's still subject to review, and we're going to have ongoing discussions with school, very much along the lines of the last point. This is about a whole, we're looking at the whole day for children, not just certain bits of it where there are particular pinch points at the moment. This is about making sure that wherever possible we can minimise the impact on children, ensure their safety, and also ensure they arrive at school in a state that they're fit to learn and are ready for the school day ahead, and that work is ongoing. The initial, I think we touched on that, so do you want me to pause there as well, Leader?
I'm going to ask how you're going to achieve that, you know, because as I say, it's a pretty dangerous situation we have there now. It's all the potential to make it even more dangerous. So how are you going to achieve a safe traffic plan or walking route to school?
I think
just before, members, we talked about the traffic impact assessment, we talked about the travel plan. This is specifically about safe walking routes, of which there is currently a route which is being looked at, and I think you mentioned it just before. At today's date, I don't know what the outcome of the visit was last week, but that potentially is one of the ways which you could alleviate some of the strain on the school.
Where we walked last Friday, we walked up what's known as the Dumpty Path. Now, the Dumpty Path has been, I've known it for 50 odd years since I've lived up there, and people are very, very reluctant to use that path, particularly women, because in the past there has been assaults and those kind of things, and unfortunately the young lady who was murdered, her body was just dumped there. You know, why don't we look at something and say that might be a safe route to school? There are a whole lot of issues that prevent people from using it. Now, even if they did use that path, they have the whole of Trewethin to walk through, then they get to Church Avenue. And as I say, there's a whole difference of walking there at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, to walking at 8:30 in the morning when these children are going to have to walk. You really need to look at that situation at Church Avenue with all those, the amount of traffic that's coming from and to Gwynthlew and other schools in the borough, going up the Welsh School up the Garn, going to the Welsh School down Griffstown, all over the shop. Besides the amount of traffic that's already in existence, it's a main bus route. It's where every bus goes in and out of Trewethin. Besides all the additional traffic that's generated by the estate and the shopping centre there. It's a hugely difficult thing to achieve, to get a safe route there.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is clearly that piece of work is ongoing. You're right, it's not a simple task, it's not straightforward, and we are talking about a cultural shift in terms of the way people think about how they move around and how they get their children to school. Clearly we also need to involve, and we are looking to see how we can involve the whole community in that discussion, and key partners, so in terms of community safety, in terms of of other facilities that we can, other colleagues that we can bring to bear, other resources. That's part of that discussion. So we're not suggesting for a second this was ever going to be an easy ask, because it's not, but clearly there are lots of things we can do together if we put our minds to it, and I think that's what we're trying to do with the discussions around the healthy and safe walking routes to school, that it will be a hard ask, but there are things that we can do to minimise risk to children and the community, and clearly that's something that we're working on now, and it does mean some cultural, some thinking differences, and that's what we're working hard to achieve.
Right, carry on. Brian.
Just to add to that, we walked the Dumpty Path on Friday. It's been designated by the engineer as a safe and suitable walking route, but that's something which I think the members taking part in that walk on Friday agreed required further consideration, and in particular we wanted to have a meeting which I haven't actually asked John Cunningham, but we would like to have a meeting, I think, with Neighbourhood Services and with Councillor Cunningham in order to make sure that we understand the relationship between a safe walking route to school and the use of the school crossing patrol service, and whether they tie in as well as they might. So that's an ongoing piece of work which will be taken forward in the next few weeks, I hope, in order that we can identify what is appropriate. I don't share Councillor Jones's pessimism about the problems, because having walked the majority of the route yesterday and having seen and had described to us the way in which certain difficult points could be bypassed, I'm confident that with appropriate use of school crossing patrols, there is no real issue in terms of danger from traffic, so long as it is managed properly. And that's the issue with all our schools and with all our children, that you need to make sure that there is a proper travel plan in place to ensure that we do the best we can, and the schools do the best they can to ensure that children are safe. But let's just remember that it is a parental responsibility to escort their children to school. It's not our responsibility to take the place of adults in that regard. Safety is regarded as being safe, providing a parent or a suitable adult is with the child.
All right, carry on, Dominic.
The last key point coming out then in the consultation was that the initial consultation document was inaccurate and biased in favour of Pennygarn Primary School. Obviously, what we've done in reissuing an up-to-date consultation document with more information is try to respond to that concern. We don't accept that it was biased, but we obviously have gone through an extended consultation period to make sure that accurate and up-to-date information was available to all. So I think we've already responded to that. The policy impact assessment is already attached in the appendix, and it's there, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Risks, I think, have already been touched upon. There are a number of key risks to this, which are questions and concerns from stakeholders which arise whenever a school closure is proposed. We know this is a very contentious issue. We know this is going to be felt by lots of the community. We really do understand that taking a school out of our stock means that a lot of the memories and the investment that the community has made in the school feels as if we're somehow disrespecting that, and that's clearly not the intention. It's simply recognising that going forward we need to reduce our surplus places, we need to meet the requirements of the Welsh Government target in terms of reducing that surplus places, and as other colleagues have commented upon, we also require the closure in terms of help and resource the rest of the 21st Century Schools programme as well.
Andy?
Thank you. On that point, I recognise the point you make about surplus places, but I think that there needs to be some more recognition, perhaps, from elsewhere outside of here of the tough decisions we're having to make in this respect regarding schools. I think we recognise that both in terms of surplus places and being able to make the more pleasant decisions that we want to make about new school buildings and new facilities and better standards, that we need to make tough decisions to go along that route. But I think that just needs to be recognised maybe outside of here from a Welsh Government perspective a bit more, so that they recognise the tough decisions that we have to make.
All right, thanks for that. Carry on, Dominic.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Obviously, I can't speak for Welsh Government, but I'd endorse those comments completely, and clearly officers will be raising that with Eston and Welsh Government through the Recovery Board when we have those meetings. So look, actions that need to be taken following this meeting, so if I can get it on the screen. Too far. Sorry. If the recommendation is to proceed, then there will be, we'll need to publish statutory notices. That requires a further consultation period, which is 28 working days, or roughly about 6 weeks, which then generates a report that comes back to Cabinet at the end of the statutory notice period for a final for a determination of the proposal to be made at that point. So if the decision today is to go ahead, there is a further statutory consultation period and a further report comes back to Cabinet. Clearly the authority has a duty, whenever possible, to remove surplus places, and at the same time we need to make sure that we're providing the right provision in the right place, of the right size, and then I should be able to access that provision in school buildings that are suitable and in good condition. So in terms of Pennygarn, clearly we know we need to make significant investment, and those discussions are started in terms of what that will look like. This proposal, I think, again, has already been said, is part of the 21st Century Schools plan that the Council's already signed up to with Welsh Government. If we make any changes to that plan, then clearly that will cause us to have to go back to Welsh Government to potentially renegotiate elements of the 21st Century plan, I think is a fair comment. That would cause us some difficulty and may mean that there's no change anyway, and Welsh Government say, they may want to have a discussion with us about what that proposal any new proposal might look like. And it may also potentially suspend some other elements of the 21st Century programme. So it's a significant step if we had to go back and renegotiate. So recommendations are...
I'll do that. Yeah. Hang on a second. Any other member want to speak before we get to there?
On item 8 we've got risks. Now, to me, the risks attached to these proposals are huge. And bearing in mind the fact that the LEA is in special measures, you know, and I'm not being disrespectful to anyone, but we are in special measures and dependent on Welsh Government support. Now, our Welsh Government, the unit that supports the LEA, are they fully in favour of these proposals or not?
Just to take members back a little bit in time, when the original Eston inspection took place, it eventually led to us being put in special measures. The only comment about the 21st century schools was the authority wasn't doing so with sufficient pace. They weren't concerned with the very many amalgamations that we'd undertaken prior to that inspection. What they were saying was you would need to do more and you need to do it more quickly. In terms of the proposals as they stand in this specific case and with other individual specific cases, Welsh Government do not any longer approve or disapprove of proposals. It used to be, prior to October of 2013, that in the event of objections, Welsh Government would actually form a judgment and decide whether or not a school would close. That changed in October 2013, and this decision, if statutory notices are published, will come back to this Cabinet, and Welsh Government do not have a say.
With respect, you know, that wasn't the question I was asking. I refer to the fact that the LEA is in special measures and need to be supported by personnel from the Welsh Government. Are they in favour of these proposals?
I can come back on that. I mean, in terms of the Local Authority Education Service and Children and Young People's Partnership, to give it its full title, so it's more than Education Service. The reason why we're in special measures, and it's really what the Recovery Board have been focusing in on over the last couple of meetings, is how does the whole Council and all of the services in the Council, together with partners, look at getting the best possible outcomes for children. So they're very keen to make sure that the partnership plans that are already in place and the Council has already approved are delivered upon. And that, I think, is very clearly their expectation. And they want to see us do that with rigour and pace. So while they haven't commented on this particular proposal, they've certainly looked at other proposals that Cabinet's recently considered, and we will be expected to report back on the outcome of this today. So it's not for me to speak for the Recovery Board, because clearly I'm party to it, but not a member of the Welsh Government appointees. I think it's safe to say that this would cause some concern if we were to go back and say that we've veered from our own policy at this point. I think that's a fair comment.
Anthony?
That really comes to the crux of the matter, doesn't it? Because, you know, the reality is that they have us by the collar. You know, they quite rightly, I think, want us to cut the number of surplus places because we want to be funding kids, not empty chairs. They quite rightly want us to invest in schools so that's a better learning environment going forwards. But the logical consequence of that makes things impossible for local members like Lewis who have fought very hard for their local school and have continued to do so and ask questions over the last few months. But it really puts us in that position, and then we're told that that people are neither for or against things. It just becomes quite frustrating, really.
Any other members? Yeah. No, before I ask Brian to sum up. Right, Brian?
Well, I just wanted to comment on what Lewis was saying. We had a private meeting, if you recall, after the last Cabinet with the Recovery Board, and I think they made their expectations very clear about the pace of making the changes within the 21st Century Programme as well as in respect of other areas of concern. So I'm confident that they're very much looking at this with a view to checking that we are doing what we said we were going to do. And basically, let's not forget that we said we were going to do this in 2010. We repeated it in 2011. We repeated it again in 2013. We really do need to actually have the courage of our convictions and put this programme into place, not because we like particularly closing schools, but because it's only by closing schools which no longer can deliver the service that we expect our schools in future to be able to deliver. I know Pontypridd is an excellent school at the moment, but it isn't going to be able to retain and maintain all of those standards and expectations which we hope for our 21st century schools for indefinitely into the future, and we really do need to take advantage of the opportunities we've got in the 21st Century Programme to actually invest in improving other schools in order to meet the needs of the population of pupils within Torfaen generally on an improved basis. And I'm quite confident that the provision within Penygarn will be as excellent as the provision has been in Pont Ywenydd. I've every confidence in the head teacher in that school to be able to deliver on that basis. So I don't think, with respect, Lewis, that there is a huge risk to the education of the children in Pont Ywenydd. If there were, I don't think any of us would be supporting that. We think the risks that are there can be managed before September 15, which is, after all, 15 months away. So I'm urging colleagues to support this proposal. We've got a few hurdles to overcome yet. We've got to see how... Well, we know that the school is objecting to the proposals and will be complaining about the way in which the consultation has been carried out. They'll be complaining about the way in which the play service carried out the consultation with the pupils. I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of those complaints. No, I won't prejudge. I think it's unfortunate that they feel that way, but I'm confident that we've done things as well as we could reasonably expect it to in terms of consulting, that we've reached a fair and reasonable conclusion that this proposal is one of those which enables us to have confidence that the 21st Century Programme will improve education facilities generally across Torfaen, and that we really must now be seen to be supporting the principles that we espoused in 2010 and 11 and 2013.
Right, thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, with due respect, Brian, mentioned the Recovery Board. Not being a member of the Recovery Board, I'm not certain at the facts that came out in respect of this.
I was referring to a meeting of the Recovery Board with the Cabinet last 2 weeks ago.
Let's get on. I think we've had a good debate, actually. I think everybody had an opportunity to put their case. So I'm going to put the recommendation. It's recommended that members note the outcome of the consultation exercise and agree, A, to publish statutory notices to discontinue Pont Ywenydd Primary School with the dispersals of pupils to neighbouring schools, predominantly Penygarn Primary School, with effect from the 1st of September 2015. B, to adjust / relocate catchment areas as follows: current Pont Ywenydd Primary School to Penygarn Primary School, and C, to receive a further report in September 2014 following the end of the statutory notice period with a view to making recommendations on how to proceed. I'm moving those recommendations. All show. Right. Thanks. Anybody against?
I can't vote.
No, of course you can't. Apologise for that. There you are. The recommendations has been accepted, so that ends and concludes that item. I'm now moving on to Brian. Oh, you've got to go. Right, sorry. Anybody else? Brian has to leave. He can't take part in this. This is the home to school and post-16 transport outcome of consultation on the proposed changes to mileage criteria. Again, this is Dermot and John Tushin. Over to you.
Thank you, Leader. I've said this is a report on the outcome of the consultation exercise, where we're proposing that we move to the adoption of statutory mileage for home to school transport, where at the moment the council policy is more generous than what the statutory guidance allows for, and most of our local authority partners have already adopted the statutory guidance. Key messages here. I'll try and interpret 3.1, which causes me great difficulty in reading, so I'll try and say it slightly differently than it reads, which is basically, if you're under the age of 8 and you live over 1.5 miles away from school, then you get free transport. If you're over the age of 8 and you live more than 2 miles away from school, you get free transport. So that's how it stands at the moment. The statutory guidance would be 2 miles and 3 miles instead of 1.5 and 3. So we've got quite a significantly more generous transport policy at the moment. There is no statutory obligation for the Council to provide free transport to post-16 learners, but we do so on a discretionary basis at the moment. That's by means of a travel grant. 3.3 really says if we're going to make the cost reductions by moving to the statutory mileage criteria and extending that to post-16, we would then be able to borrow more money that would underpin some of the 21st Century School plan. We do have a duty to provide free transport to pupils, obviously between home and their catchment school, as laid down by legislation. And in deciding whether or not free transport is provided, we have to have regard to, this is detailed in 4.2, have regard to the age of the pupils and the nature of the routes which pupils could reasonably expect to take, and then any wish for the parent of the pupil to be educated in a school which provides religious education in accordance with the religion or denomination to which the parent adheres. So that obviously remains unchanged in this paper. The majority of councils in Wales have already adopted the statutory guidelines, or else in the process of doing so, and we have checked. No changes are being proposed at this time in the criteria for providing free transport on medical grounds or safe routes to schools. So in terms of 5 and the issues and findings coming out of the consultation, there was a minor error in the initial consultation, so we did not make it clear that if the Council was to decide to change the mileage criteria, it would need to also extend the lower limit of 2 miles to all primary school age children and not just those up to the age of 8. So for that reason we suspended the consultation and reran the consultation in effect with an updated paper. The consultation was extensively promoted through all schools and prescribed consultees, and details of that are listed elsewhere in the consultation document and following. And a file of the questionnaires, the letters and all the comments received has obviously been lodged in the members' library prior to the issue of the report. 5.5 and following outlines detail of the questionnaire results. And we had 78 respondents to the questionnaire. I don't propose, Leader, if it's okay, to go through each of those in detail at the moment unless you want me to, because they're clear and they're available there, other than to say that clearly there were some differences between what the young people were saying in some of their messages about what they thought was acceptable as opposed to adults. So, for instance, when asked, do you agree with the proposal to change the mileage for free school transport to 2 miles for primary, there was a significant difference in what the children were saying and what the adults were saying. So I would draw your attention to that. There are 2 clear messages that can be drawn from the survey, in that it's recognised that we need more money to spend on improving Torvine schools, and that was a theme that was coming through. That's detailed in 5.7, if I can bring it on screen. And also that, should the proposal be implemented, then we shouldn't do it as an instant change, that we should phase the change to reduce any disruption to children, disruption to children, students and attendance at the school or college. Clearly, most of the adult respondents weren't in favour of the change, because clearly this would will have an impact. So, if it's okay, Leader, I'm going to take us straight through to key issues arising from the proposal in Section 6. Um, 6.2, I think it's worth just reading out. Cost reductions can be made by moving to the statutory mileage criteria and extending the criteria to post-16 learners. Now, at the moment, with the future of post-16 delivery in Torvine still being decided, a complete withdrawal of free transport is not being advanced at this point. But what is being suggested is that we move to the entitlement changes from the entitlement change from 2 to 3 miles. So we're not talking about removing post-16, which we could do in terms of the statutory guidance. We're simply aligning the criteria so that it's the same criteria as secondary age pupils. If we didn't do that, it would be there would be a more generous post-16 allowance, if you like, than there would be for secondary age pupils, and that would be unfair. The scale and pace of the cost reductions is outlined in 6.3. Obviously, if we're looking at a phased implementation, that will shift really, and we won't realise all of those savings in one go. So those savings will be realised over a period of time. Section 7 go through the comments from overview and scrutiny. I can bring them up on screen, which again I'll just go through one by one. The first one being supported, overview and scrutiny committee supported a change in the mileage criteria, subject to the local authority applying in full with the Learner Travel Wales measures. They felt that they would be unable to give a view as to whether the changes should be introduced in full or phased in, but again I refer back to the consultation responses, which in general suggested a phased introduction. They felt that any savings should be used to underpin the funding requirements of the 21st Century Programme, which obviously is the intention in the report, but noted that if the resources required to fund the programme were not as much as first envisaged, any additional resource should be diverted to schools. It's highly likely that any savings that we make will go fully into the 21st Century Schools programme. The committee also wanted a policy impact assessment to include a risk relating to impact on low-income families as a result of the change, and that's been included in the impact assessment, which is attached to the report as Appendix 1. Moving quickly just to the risk associated with these proposals in Section 9. There clearly is a reputational risk resulting from the negative reaction to the proposals. This is us being less generous now and moving to the statutory guidance, so clearly there will be that reputational risk. There is a financial risk of not changing policy as budgets are reduced, because clearly we'd have to look at potentially finding that saving from elsewhere. And there is the ongoing risk that if we don't have that resource, which is associated with the last point, we won't be able to fund all the potential borrowing requirements in the 21st Century Schools programme. Actions to be taken following the decision in Section 10. If approved, the Council will need to advise parents and carers of the new policy. That's a significant undertaking, and would make sure that we use every means possible to make sure that all families or potential because it's potential families, I suppose, it's people who may not have children at the moment, will also be impacted by this over time. Make sure that everyone is aware of what has changed, and there are a number of means that we are looking at to do that, including all the information systems that we currently have available. And some contracts will also need to be amended and re-tendered, and operators advised accordingly, which is, we think, quite a manageable task. So, Leader, that's really the report going through. If there are any questions, then we invite them to the recommendations there.
Right, thanks for that. Any questions? John?
Just a question on the consultation process. I think it's rather a peculiar consultation process, actually. Some of the questions that were asked is like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas, really, because I see that when you ask the parents, do you agree with the proposal, 80% no. Yet when you ask the question, does your child currently receive free transport, 53% no. So 27% of those obviously voted for the first question, really, which they weren't entitled to do. So it's a question that they were loaded against us, really, this type of questions, in my opinion. That's the first question. The second question is, how does this affect the Welsh medium comprehensive schools, for want of a better word, who travel outside the boroughs, and also some of the faith schools, obviously? Are there consistencies with their authorities they move out of into our authorities? Do they get any special advantages that our pupils within our catchment areas don't?
I might come in as well.
Just in terms of the questions and turkeys voting for Christmas, this was never going to be a popular thing to ask. The response rate is quite low, really, considering the number of people we provide transport to. But yes, we expected that people would, by and large, respond, saying that they didn't want to see the changes happen, but if the changes were to happen, that they would want to see them phased in. So, you couldn't really ask the questions in any other way. It seemed the fairest way of asking it.
Sorry, just to add that, clearly the point is that some people answering the questionnaire will be thinking about either starting a family, and they'll be impacted upon it later, and people do think about which school they go to, and they will take into account issues like transport and free transport. So I'm sure some of the people who said no are people whose children haven't started school yet, for instance.
And just then, in terms of faith and Welsh medium schools, the proposals that are in front of you today will impact in exactly the same way as they will for English medium and non-faith schools. And we're responsible for transport provision for children coming from Torfaen, Our neighbours are responsible for transport provision in their own respective areas, and the two shouldn't cross over, really.
Any other questions? If not, you see the recommendations. That the Cabinet notes and considers the outcome of the consultation process and approves the introduction of statutory mileage limits for free school transport of 2 miles or over for primary age learners and 3 miles or over for secondary and post-16 learners. Order point 2, that the home to school and post-16 transport policy is amended accordingly and advertised as much to learners and their parents stroke carers. Order point 3, that the new mileage criteria is phased in and therefore are only applied to new applicants received for primary reception years, secondary year 7 or post-16 year 12 for the start of the 2015-16 academic session. All agreed? Please show. Thanks very much. Thank you, Dermot, and thank you. Right. That then concludes the minute, so I'll close the meeting.
Excuse me, Leader. Sorry to interrupt at the end, but just to point out that we have 2 councillors sitting in the public gallery, which they're entitled to do, and they're 2 governors of Pontnewydd, so they will make an interest and sign in the book, which is required by the code. Sorry, it was... Yeah,
Right, thanks.
That's fine, thank you.
I'll speak to Linda. She'll explain it to you.